The hosts of the Swine Brothers show are not role models. They're not even human. They're complete monsters. The Swine Brothers show is dumb, crude, thoughtless, ugly, sexist, self-destructive, foolish, and a crime against humanity. Some of the things they do would cause a person to get hurt, expelled, arrested, possibly deported. The fact they blatantly ripped this off from another source should be an indicator of their shameless depravity. This extreme in bad taste will offend anyone with a working brain, so listener discretion is advised. If you're still here, welcome to the sewer of the internet.
And she begged me to fucking tip that stripper a hell of a lot more money because she was getting a lot more show out of it.
And with that, welcome to a Swine Brothers special. A Halloween special, even though it's not yet Halloween. You can email us at cosmicgodsdie@gmail.com. Facebook is Swine Brothers, and Twitter is SwineBros666. I am your ever alive host, Elliot Lindemood, and my co-host is...
I am the Jim. And I have failed, or at least Skype failed me.
So we have a very special treat for you today. I set up an interview with Dayal Patterson, a writer for Metal Hammer, Terrorizer, and now he runs his own publishing company called Cult Never Dies, focused on black metal. He's also written several amazing books, including pretty much the go-to on black metal, and his biography of the band Rotting Christ, which you should all check out. You can check him out, cultneverdies.com. Anyway, so we set up this interview, and Jim doesn't know much about black metal. He will admit that.
Yeah, I don't know much, and I follow around. And we started off with a nice little half hour with both of us because I wanted to go some info and BS.
So
Skype lost that.
Yeah, so we did two sessions. The first session was about 30 minutes with Jim, me, and Mr. Patterson, and Skype fucked up. Jim said he recorded it, and it said that it was recording, but I saw it. I saw that it was recording. That's why I didn't bother, correcting him or anything. But Skype lost the recording somehow. Well, we did another interview with just me and him. Jim had to go to work, although I believe I said he was dead and that I was going to raise him from the dead for the next show. And we did about 2 hours worth. What I'd like to do really quick is just sort of go over what we talked about during the lost interview. He talked about how he got into metal, which wasn't, too different from us, the bigger bands and people saw that he had a shirt on and, here, listen to this, and
yeah, a bit closer to me getting into metal though, because you weren't around during the tape trading days.
Yeah, I had CD trading days. we talked about just that. We talked about why he decided to write about black metal. It was because if you read black metal books, a lot of it goes into Burzum and Mayhem, and maybe Emperor and Darkthrone are mentioned, but no Immortal, no Marduk, no, there's a lot of the black metal, I guess, bands that are in history that isn't being written about. So we talked about that. We talked about the lyrics. Jim was on fire that day, despite his self-professed not knowing anything. He was on
my main thing was, I was going over like one of the things I'm always pissed off about when I bump into youngins. That's like you're not sitting there listening to the music, performing a lot of introspection, asking yourself the questions you're too afraid to, and all that. And he was attributing it more to casuals, just like, wanting to hear the music as opposed to people who were truly invested in it. Because back in the day, we didn't have easy access to internet, so it wasn't everywhere you could go with a point and click. You actually had to write people, get into fanzines and all that crap to get the material, or bump into the band live.
and it was saying that black metal is a little bit less about not that we don't all love death metal, and I believe he likes death metal as well, but black metal is a little bit less about, say, Cannibal Corpse is basically the musical soundtrack for a horror movie. It's great fun, but there's nothing, you know, amazingly philosophical or spiritual in a Cannibal Corpse song. Maybe the music, but whereas black metal is a little bit more interested in the spiritual, and a little bit the lyrics can be a little bit more spiritual, which is why Cannibal Corpse could get away with in death metal scene being in, say, Ace Ventura, whereas if Gorgoroth was in Ace Ventura, we wouldn't hear about them because black metal band murdered by fans. He said that Morbid Angel was sort of one of the gateways between, sort of blurring the lines between that sort of entertainment and more spiritual. And we talked about the rise of, say, death metal, and why black metal was, you had Entomb playing a show for disco kids and earache videos on MTV and things like that. And then unfortunately his neighbor started drilling, and so we had to I didn't think it was going to be.
That is another big reason I wanted to have that clip, and I'm sad it's not here because that sound was just amazing.
I didn't realize it was going to be so loud.
I guess it was like right at his house they were doing it.
Yeah.
Just plank, 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 plank.
So we had to end it there, and about an hour later we did the 2-hour interview, which you were about to hear, and I think it went extremely well. Of course, I'm in a way. Well, I don't want to say I'm glad I didn't get the first part. I froze up during the first part. I completely.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened. I had like 50 questions in my mind, and my mouth refused to say anything. It was just, so Jim had to rescue me over there.
Well, at any rate, here's the fucking interview. Enjoy, douchebags, douchettes, and have happy trails.
Yes, enjoy. Hello and welcome back to the Swine Brothers Show. Although you won't have noticed any time has passed, it's been about an hour. I'm still Elliot, and we're still interviewing. However, we were minus the Jim because he died. Yeah, he's dead. I'll bring him back for the next show. A bit of necromancy. So anyway, we were talking about the underground and things like that, and I was talking about, I guess, how the underground backlash to get to the mainstream. Of course, not all of that is bad. You have the Black Legions, which you wrote about in Evolution of the Cult. One of the most interesting black metal stories, I think. So you had the Black Legions, and you have Hell's Headbangers and things like that. But some of the more crazy strains of the underground, like I said, Cannibal Corpse sold out because they didn't change and things. And you were talking about the Black Legions, and you sort of introduced me to the Black Legions. You said you were into them in the 90s, right? You were.
Yeah, like sort of late 90s. I got into them, and they weren't really popular at the time at all. It's interesting how they've become kind of rediscovered and become this very cult band. But I think again, that's probably the internet to some extent has helped, because it was very hard to act. I mean, the only stuff I had by the Black Legions at the time would have been the releases, the 2 official Vlad Tepes releases, and I think we had 1 cassette. But a lot of this stuff that only got turned up years later, sort of obscure demos and these obscure bands. And as I say, that's something else that's kind of its time, in the sense that it would be very hard now to be an anonymous musician, or to keep things completely underground and have a situation where only people you really want to hear your stuff can hear your stuff. And these days it's as soon as something's around, more or less it's uploaded. And bands like Ghost and Batushka, they managed to be anonymous for a yeah, it's very hard. It's almost impossible to be anonymous in the age of the internet. I think Kiss would have been, it would have been a very different career for them if they'd been around in the age of the internet, because it would have been much harder to keep your alter ego sort of anonymous and secret, and so that was a product of its time. And a lot of those black metal guys back in the day, you didn't really know what they looked like, even the bigger bands, because you just had the pictures in fanzines and photocopied flyers and that kind of thing. So I think there was a lot more mystery at that stage.
I was just about to mention Ghost and Batushka. Ghost, at least the people I knew, because I know people in sort of, who know things, I think they always knew who the singer was. That would be Tobias from, well, he's most known in my world from Repugnant.
Right.
But nobody really knew who the Nameless Skulls are. And Batushka, I saw a bunch of different theories about who they were, including the actual who they were. But both of them were unmasked by lawsuits, which we're talking about bands who they didn't really like the Black Legions in the 90s, kind of like Hellhammer. I told you about Eric Keller from Good Bad Music. He's from Switzerland. He hung out with the Hellhammer and Celtic Frost guys back in the day. Right. And he said that he couldn't give away the early Hellhammer demos at his high school. He was given a few of them and couldn't give them away. And he said in 2009, I think I just sold my last copy for like $100. So it's funny how, I guess, and Hellhammer and the Black Legions were both pretty abrasive. I mean, one could say lack of musicianship, at least, technical musicianship. But if you hear behind it, you can hear pretty awesome music.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't. I mean, those are extreme examples, but a lot of the stuff which is now quite recognized and revered and understood to be important releases at the time didn't necessarily have that kind of appreciation. We sell back issues of Terrorizer at the store, and I sometimes go through them because I collected them originally to complete my own collection. And it's interesting to see the reviews of records like, well, quite big bands really now, like Emperor and Impaled Nazarene and Marduk, and a lot of those records were getting 3 or 4 out of 5, whereas later they would be recognized as kind of genre-defining classics. So I think a lot of the time, bands aren't necessarily recognized in their early days as being quite as important as they later proved to be. And Burzum's another good example. Burzum and Mayhem, obviously hugely influential bands, but if you look at the early reviews in, let's say, high street metal magazines, they often got very bad reviews. Bathory is another example. Hellhammer. All these bands got I think all 4 of those bands got 1-star reviews in Kerrang at some point in their career. So it's kind of sometimes you need the benefit of hindsight, and for the right people to just. Well,
even Black Sabbath when they first started, people hated them.
Yeah.
Well, critics hated them.
Yeah.
I think I read somewhere where Bathory, I think Kerrang started. What was it? Was it Metal Forces that they started, which was an offshoot? They started some magazine as an offshoot, and Bathory won Best Death Metal because obviously the names weren't codified back then. I think they won Best Death Metal album in that offshoot, and in Kerrang, I think they were second worst, only to Stryper that same year. So it's just even I remember I have a review of Mayhem's Pure Fucking Armageddon demo, which is a very raw recording.
I was going to say, to be fair, that's not the easiest record to get into.
No, it took me about 5 years. It's and they hated it. Whereas I think a lot of the Black Legion stuff and Hellhammer, I'm not saying it's not genuine, because I genuinely love Hellhammer. The Apocalyptic Raids EP is something I play once every day almost. But I get the sense that a lot of it is we have to like this, or pretend to like this band because they're like really underground. So we have to show off our underground credibility. Which, like I said, I'm not saying it's all. I have plenty of friends who love Vlad Tepes, and I love Vlad Tepes, but I think a lot of the internet and the eBay speculators, as I call them, the ones who buy $300
right
for a rehearsal tape.
And it's amazing how many fake cassettes are selling week in, week out on eBay.
Or yeah, I think the most I ever saw was a MDC, a Millions of Dead Cops record that went for $1,400.
I mean, at
It's
least
like
a record is a record. I mean, the
yeah,
cassette demos are just it's almost impossible to verify. Which is a shame because I really like cassette, the
yeah.
original demo cassettes, and
Oh yeah,
I have
that's a
some.
great. I have a Moonblood cassette, which reports to be official, but I can't find any info about it, which has the most horrible cover of Iron Maiden's "The Trooper" ever heard.
That sounds.
Terrible German accent. You'll take my life, but I take yours too.
I mean, I see so much Black Legions and Moonblood, and because people know they can't be verified. I mean, but you see them for sale in the same countries. It's always like Mexico or countries like this.
Brazil.
Yeah, and you see the same people selling them sort of month in, month out. So you think, the chances of getting one copy would be slim. The chances to get one a week were pretty much impossible. But that's it's very hard now. As I say,
It's hard to verify.
It's impossible, more or less impossible, unless you can only do it really in the sense that if you know somebody, like I, for example, have traded with people for stuff that I know they got in the 90s. Well, no one was faking this stuff in the 90s because it wasn't worth anything. You couldn't give away a Vlad Tepes demo, so nobody would be doing a fake one. So that's the only time I think you really know. And occasionally with some of the demos, they would have handwriting on the inlay or something like that, and that's fairly easy to verify because you can just search online and see what it actually should look like. But generally, yeah, it's a minefield, really.
Well, that was going to be my point. Is that I have no idea if this Trooper cover is even by Moonblood, because it sort of sounds like their level of demo recording, and the guy has a German accent. But like I said, I don't know if it was by Moonblood or if it was by Hans and Fritz in their garage. Well, I
think Moonblood did cover the Trooper. I don't know if the version you have is an original tape, but I think they did. I think they did cover it, or maybe I've just heard maybe
you probably heard the same thing I have.
Yeah, there was. There was a. I'll have to do some research into that. I mean, Moonblood is one of those names that appears a lot because their stuff was so limited that you can charge a high price, and that's the thing. I see people actually. It's not like this stuff doesn't sell. I do see people paying like, $70 for a tape that's clearly been made that week because they think it's, from the 90s or an original cassette by the band that's been released later in limited numbers, and
See, I was lucky in a way because I had Eric Keller and he posted a lot of tapes to his MP3 blog. So it was nothing that was, in print or whatever, Death's Infernal Death Demo or the Terrorizer Nausea Split. So I got introduced to really good rips of copies. Do you like reissues though? I'm guessing you must like, rather than buying $70 for a tape that was made in '95, let's reissue the original thing.
Yeah,
which Moonblood has done.
Yeah, I'm not a hardcore. I don't see myself as a hardcore collector or anything. I do have, I have a collection that I've accumulated because I've been listening to this music for 25 years, or 20 years, or whatever it's been. What has it been? Yeah, 25 years. Yeah, so I kind of have accumulated stuff, but I'm by no means a purist. And if there's a good reissue, or sometimes these remastered versions sound better, and sometimes
they don't.
Sometimes they don't. But yeah, I'm not somebody who spends vast quantities trying to get the originals. It is about the music at the end of the day. Although I do like to have like a vinyl rather than an MP3 because there's a sort of ritual or a kind of focal point when you put it down on the turntable. It does sort of you do consume it in a different way,
I like physical copies. I bought because I didn't have any Dark Funeral on CD, so I bought it's over there. I have a laptop with a webcam, but I'm lazy. I have the Dark Funeral 25 Years of Satanic Symphonies box set, which was everything they recorded, and I mean everything, and a couple live sets. And I had Dark Funeral, I bought it on MP3, but I didn't have anything on CD, so I was why not buy the box set? And sitting over there, I hate that it came because the CDs came in basically sleeves. They're not actually cases, so you have to be careful with them.
Yeah, I got a Judas Priest box set like that.
Yeah, I always hated, and but so yeah, a lot of people my age appear to be collectors. A lot of people my age, there's a website called The Hard Times, which I know you've heard of, and it's satire, but their satire is alarmingly accurate. One of the satire articles: vinyl collector about to purchase first turntable.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of truth in that. There is an element of extreme metal probably has a bigger amount of collectors within it than most music genres.
That and punk.
At
least the hardcore.
Yeah, probably. I mean, that's the thing. When you get any, it's kind of the flip side. It's good if a genre has fans that appreciate physicals. It's certainly good for the artists. But the flip side of that is there'll always be some people that just buy stuff, and cassettes is another one. A lot of people buy cassettes, but they don't listen to them. It's kind of, I mean, I guess it's up to people what they want to do. But it's a shame if you don't, it's a shame if somebody doesn't have a turntable or, you can get a cassette player now for like 10 quid, $20 or whatever.
You can buy a tape for $5. I mean, at Amoeba, I bought a great album by the band Dream Death, Journey into Mystery, which is one of my favorite albums. It's a mix of thrash and doom. When I bought it for $1, I was like, on tape, and it was just, and I bought a Carpathian, I think it's pronounced Carpathian actually, a Carpathian Forest bootleg for the same price, and I was like, I don't know, I like tapes.
Yeah, I think I'm glad we don't have to rely on them anymore, because I remember, when sometimes you'd have music that was only on tape and it would get chewed up or whatever. But there is something, there is an element of nostalgia about kind of the fetishization of these certain formats. There is a level of nostalgia, that's involved in that. But there is something about tangible products and tangible objects, which is different to just a digital file,
Yep, but I take digital files over streaming any day.
Yeah.
People talk about MP3s being impersonal. At least it's still my copy of an album. Streaming, it's literally you're just sort of tapping into the cloud. I have a few things I want to go over. I wanted to touch on the image a little bit, but first, because obviously that's something I sort of don't know much about. But I wanted to get one of my favorite chapters in the Evolution of the Cult book, which has been expanded in book form, is the Rotting Christ chapter. How awesome was it to write a book about Rotting Christ?
Before I answer that, I'm just going to let you know you're distorting a bit. I don't know if you're hearing that on your side or whether.
No, I can't hear.
So it's recording you okay?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. So how's the Rotting Christ book is something that's it's definitely one of the highlights in the kind of career, that's writing career stroke publishing life of Cult Never Dies. I would say it's one of the projects that's kind of closest to my heart, because it did take a lot of work and a lot of blood, sweat and tears, to use a sort of well-worn cliche. It was quite an intense project to be part of, in a way, because it was the first. We had done the Mortis book, so it wasn't the first book we did dedicated to one band or one artist. But the Mortis book was really a reissue of Mortis's own writing with my new interviews with him, sort of as an addition, and sort of unprinted material and that kind of thing. But the Rotting Christ book was was a brand new project. It took kind of 3 years to write, and it was quite intense, because most of the books I've written have been about, say, 15 to 20 bands, which means a chapter per band, maybe 5,000-6,000 words, which is much more than a magazine article or an online article normally is. So it's no small thing, but to write 80 to 90,000 words just about one band, you do have to kind of work very closely, and you sort of have to get within the band almost, and sort of understand the mentality, and live that discography, because it's a band that has obviously 30 years worth of recordings, so you need to sort of
And many different genre changes.
which was a part of the attraction of writing it, really.
Yes.
Was that they had this very varied discography, and they had a lot of stories to tell. But Greek people aren't, they aren't always the easiest people to organize. So within the most intense period of writing was probably the last 6 months, and we were talking every day, and it became, there was a lot of work and a lot of I think both of us had to really push ourselves to sort of make the book happen. But the reception's been fantastic, and it's I was actually looking through it today. I don't really look through my books or our books sort of on a daily basis, but I was looking through the Rotting Christ one today, and I think it is one of the best things we've done. It's got I would say it's much more intimate than any other metal biography, and maybe a lot more intimate than most music biographies. It's very unglamorous look at a band. There's a lot of honesty, and I think you learn a lot about the people behind the band. You learn a lot about Greece, both as a metal territory and also as a country. And I think it also has quite a lot of insight on kind of the birth of black metal and the birth of sort of underground metal in the late 80s, early 90s. So I think it touches on a lot of stuff other than just, Rotting Christ discography. And that was always kind of the aim. And that's why we involved people from, Watain and Moonspell and Cradle of Filth, and kind of got other people to talk about their experiences with Rotting Christ, and sort of, and I think that's always like a theme of our books, is it's about a certain subject, but they always sort of overlap slightly to tell you about the broader picture. So if it's talking about Mortis, it's going to tell you about who Mortis influenced. It's talking about Rotting Christ, let me tell you about who they took influence from, who they played with. So we're always trying to build up a bigger picture in that sort of. Yeah.
And that's what the best book should do, is give you a context. I'll be honest, and I really do want to read it, and I have looked for it. I have not had the chance to read it yet. Mostly just I haven't found it on Bookshare or anything, and that's unfortunate, because I really do want to read it.
That's something that I need to look more into, actually.
I keep requesting it, but they don't pay attention to requests anymore. But I know, because I know about, from I've read excerpts. You posted excerpts and things like that, and it looks like an amazing book. And basically, you should all buy it. I command you. So one of the things about Rotting Christ that because I didn't know anything. I knew the name. I knew the name from Dave Mustaine's little hissy fit in 2004, 2005.
Which is discussed in the book.
Whenever I first heard the name Rotting Christ, I thought it was going to be death metal, because it just sounds like an 80s death metal band. It's sort of like Rotting Corpse.
I mean, they were, in a sense, at least for a year, they were an 80s death metal band.
Grindcore. But because there's a Texas band called Rotting Corpse. I was like, oh yeah, Rotting Corpse, Rotting Christ.
Yeah. And also Ripping Corpse.
Yep, Ripping Corpse. Great band. Great album. When I read the chapter in your book, and I sort of looked up, them more, because like I said, I hadn't really heard, and I just heard, so you can always tell it's Rotting Christ. Maybe not the first couple demos, because they were a grindcore band, a pretty good grindcore band actually. Mm-hmm. But you can always tell it's Rotting Christ, even when they went gothy and things like that. But it's one of the most diverse bands I could think of without compromising their original integrity.
I mean, that's a band that's always evolved and always tried new things, and but the fact that the main songwriter is always Sakis means that there is that kind of there is a continuity. Some bands sort of reinvent themselves because the songwriter changes. Mayhem would be a good example of that. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with that, but Rotting Christ is interesting because the evolution of the band's sound kind of happens through whatever Sakis is.
Very organic.
Yeah, it's very organic, and you also have kind of, as much as you might try to do something new, you're always going to sort of subconsciously include certain approaches to melodies, and you can always hear kind of a touch of the way Sakis approaches melody and rhythm and so on within the different albums, even though they're hugely different stylistically. You can kind of hear, oh yeah, that's that Rotting Christ kind of guitar. Well, yeah, basically it's the guitars. It's how he manages the guitars, and yeah, I think they're definitely one of the most varied extreme metal bands to date.
Yes, they're the, Jim and I were talking a little bit off air about changing your sound versus not changing your sound. And I think they're a good argument for evolving your sound, I'll say, not changing, because changing is what a certain Bay Area thrash band called Metallica did. whereas I love early Metallica, but hey, whereas evolving is sort of what Rotting Christ did, which is, like I said, you can always tell what they're, which band you're listening to. Also, the Greek black metal scene is one of the most prolific and yet, I guess, underrated. I hate to use that word because everything's underrated.
Yeah.
If everything's.
Yeah. I think it's fair to say underrated. I mean, I think it's getting more recognition as time goes by. I mean, definitely one part of writing this book was that I wanted to, and sort of a conscious aim, because a lot of unconscious things tend to come through with these books. So one conscious aim was that, in the way that people now have this kind of image in their heads of what Helvete and the Norwegian scene was like,
yes,
I wanted to kind of create that in people's heads, to look and think about like early 90s Athens, and to have that same kind of almost mythology, but backed up by truth and facts rather than kind of rumor, and kind of create that image of how it was back then with the Storm Studio, with the Metal Era store, just to kind of capture that scene in a sort of time capsule, and kind of create that for people to appreciate that in the same way, because it was such an interesting era. I mean, I wasn't there. I wasn't in neither Norway or Greece during the early 90s. But, we can see just by the music that came out, kind of what a magical time that was. And,
yes,
bands like Varathron, Necromantia, Rotting Christ, of course, Septic Flesh, the list goes on. And most of those bands recorded in the studio that was owned by two of Rotting Christ's members, and was engineered by a third. So it was this very like central scene, and there isn't absolutely no doubt that it was Rotting Christ that had kind of kick-started that scene. So that was kind of one of the nice things about writing the book, was that we could devote a chapter to looking at sort of the wider scene, and sort of how Storm Studios had helped these bands in their early days. And like I say, I hope that people. I personally find Greece a really fascinating country anyway, and especially the Greece of sort of 80s and 90s. I think it's got a very interesting history, even forgetting about music, but especially if you're into underground metal. I think alongside Norway and Sweden, it was really such a fertile ground and such an interesting environment. I think it'd be a fascinating place to visit if I ever get that time machine working.
Yeah, I've just built that time machine. I don't think you could really do a book about the American black metal like that, because if you can't tell, I'm from America. So I've sort of studied, U.S. black metal, and it was really scattered. Like you had Profanatica in New York.
Yeah.
They're more black death metal. You had Vaughn from San Francisco. I can't help but try to imagine Vaughn playing with thrash metal bands in the Bay Area.
Well, Vaughn were really from Hawaii.
Yeah, from Hawaii, but
San Francisco, but they were from Hawaii. Profanatica, I mean, Demoncy was another one.
Yep.
Absu was probably the most important for people in Europe at the time, because they had a great visibility through Osmos. Crimson Moon, but the American black metal scene was so small until the new millennium, really.
You had a couple bands from Jim's hometown, Pennsylvania. A couple, I think. What was it? Demonic Christ. And
yes.
But also the thing about America, as opposed to say Norway and Greece, is it's a huge country with huge different scenes. So you
Yeah.
can't really do. It was very scattered and fragmented, as you said, until the early 2000s, where the Leviathan thing happened.
Yeah, I guess kind of mid to late 2000, not unlike the UK scene, it sort of takes off mid to late 2000s. Um, I mean, black metal didn't really exist in America for so long. I mean, that was a big thing with the Full Moon Productions and Petrified Zine, was that was coming out of Florida. But
Wild Rags in California.
yeah, but Wild Rags had already, they were dealing with a lot of death metal, whereas Petrified and Full Moon was on a sort of unashamedly black metal, and they were kind of hated by the people around them because they didn't really understand it. There was more death metal was the big thing, and they didn't, people didn't generally like black metal. Most of the sales were done.
Well, yeah, especially in Florida, because Florida was sort of a home of death metal. Apparently, in New York, it was a little bit different. Although, I'm laughing because the story I heard is that Paul from Puff Fanatic left Incantation because he wanted to get into black metal, and John from Incantation wanted to go more death metal. Although similar lyrical concept, and the reason Paul left was because he wanted to do a photo shoot of them, I think, in the woods naked. And
Which
John
they
was like,
did for Propanatica.
and John was like, "That's just too weird for me, dude." But they were still friends after that, and they supported each other. Whereas I could see in Florida, like I said, you have a lot of death metal bands, and all of a sudden these weird guys who don't want modern production, they don't want to, they don't want to record at Morrisound with Scott Burns, which I like some of those recordings, but they sound a bit identical sometimes.
It was a different world, It was. Death metal was the big thing in America, and black
thrash
metal.
had died.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be said that I think black metal. It doesn't surprise me that it took longer to establish itself in America than it did in Europe, because I don't think the American culture is particularly compatible with a lot of things to do.
No, they didn't really. I mean, Slayer and Possessed were the only real, and then the Morbid Angel later on, but they were the first bands who really sang about Satan. Whereas in Europe, obviously, you had Venom. Well, I guess Coven even before Black Sabbath, but that's more rock. I love Coven, though, so I'm legally obligated to mention them in every discussion about metal.
I mean, to be fair, Slayer, I mean, as you mentioned Slayer, and Slayer and Possessed were definitely important bands in the first wave of black metal. But the second wave, or what's known as the second wave, the whole 90s thing,
was more of a European, Blasphemy in Canada. But they were sort of outcasts, I guess.
There was something else. It was a fairly European phenomenon, but also, interestingly, South America. I mean, South America contributed much more to black metal than North America for many years.
Mr. Fire, Sarcophago, Sepultura.
Yeah, exactly. Mr. Fire, Sex Trash, Sepultura. Those first two Sepultura releases are, in my opinion, undeniably first wave black metal. So, yeah, I don't know. I think part of it was because black metal compared to death metal, there is a degree to which there's a greater element of spirituality, perhaps a greater element of experimentation, a greater element of artistic kind of open-mindedness, perhaps. There's a lot of things which I think perhaps was a bit of a shock to the system for the American metal scene, which was still seemed to be very much about kind of drinking beer and banging
and being technical and being clean. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just that it's not always what needs to be happening. So I think like I said, I mean, just when Vaughn came to San Francisco, obviously I wasn't there, so I can't pretend to know. But I just try to picture, I don't know, a Testament and Vaughn show.
Yeah, I don't think they ever got shows as big as that. But I mean, they definitely were not. I don't think they were very appreciated by the people they came in contact with. And to be fair, Von, in some ways, that is still closer in some ways to death metal than Emperor or Ulver or something like that, and
People still hate that demo, which I think is hilarious. I love the Satanic Blood demo,
yeah, me too.
but people still hate it.
Well, it's a very acquired taste, I guess.
Oh, it's very, I mean, raw. But as I was gonna say, I think that the turning point. I wasn't even there back then, so I can't say I know for a fact. But I think a sort of turning point in America's relationship with black metal was the Dragon Lord side project of Eric from Testament.
Okay.
Never really did much for me. It was a little too, melodic and Dimmu Borgir ripoff. But I think that sort of changed a little bit. Like, wow, this old thrash guy's getting into a form of black metal. I think that sort of changed. And Borgir is huge over here. I mean, you can find their albums at Walmart. And
yeah, I think Dimmu, Cradle of Filth, Watain, these were probably the bands that made black metal a big thing in America.
Watain not so much from what I hear.
I mean, they have a huge fan base in America.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I've never seen them around. Like, I've seen Dimmu and Cradle, obviously, but
right. But those bands have been around much. I mean, those are much older bands. But considering how much Watain have played in America, how much their fan base is from America, and so on, I think Watain was probably the band that did the most for making, let's say, old school or traditional black metal a big thing in America.
It's a real satanic, anti-cosmic Satanism, which is something I studied.
And no keyboards, and because Dimmu and Cradle are, those are bands I like, but they represent a certain extreme of black metal, and Watain are a more traditional second wave black metal band, and I think that wasn't an easy sell to America. But also, America has its own scene now. America had this huge thing with, like you say, Leviathan and Zather, and then this kind of, Krieg and certain bands like that. So, in a way, America found its own take on black metal, or it certainly found its certain. It manifested certain things which were sort of, exclusive to America, whereas some of those bands I mentioned in the 90s, they could have been European, but I mean, Crimson Moon or Demoncy, they could have been from Germany, or I'm exaggerating a bit, but they weren't so distinct.
They had a very Nordic sound, whereas some of these bands, I give bands like Leviathan a little bit of a hard time, but that's mostly because I know who their fan bases are.
Right.
more of like the California hipster guys, but no, they do what they do, and I wish them all the best. Although Zather is now country, I think.
Well, I think he's gone back to it. I don't know. He doesn't like being called black metal for some reason. I think he's a bit of a prima donna about all that.
But you had a lot of Dark Funeral is huge over here. I think because, and I like Dark Funeral. I'm not saying this to knock them, but they had a very clean production, blast beats, a very sort of, I don't want to say death metal sound, but they sort of invented that whole hyper blast black metal. I mean, if you listen to records before The Secret of the Black Arts, they were fast, but they weren't obscenely fast, which I think Dark Funeral, maybe Marduk, and a little bit later on with Enthroned Pioneer, but Dark Funeral's pretty big over here. They're more known. Behemoth are pretty much big everywhere now.
Yeah, that's probably another band that's pushed the sort of black metal, even though they're not playing purely black metal. I think they've sort of opened the American market up somewhat. I mean, there's no doubt that having Behemoth playing, with Slipknot and stuff like that does open doors for the scene in some ways.
Which people don't like, but
What's that?
People don't like, Behemoth is a very divisive band, and people don't like that Behemoth play Slipknot. I'm not a fan of Slipknot personally, but my other thing is, the thing about Behemoth is they've never struck me as a band who compromised their sound or image.
Far from it. In fact, I mean, whether you like or hate Behemoth, they've definitely made heavier music as time's gone on.
And the image gets even worse.
You can't accuse them of
selling out.
No, certainly not musically. I mean, that's one thing that's I find kind of interesting now, is that the first black metal bands to get big in America and Europe, and when I say big, I mean sort of break through to a wider metal audience, were bands that sort of softened the black metal sound, and I don't mean that as a criticism, because I really like.
It's just a fact.
Yeah, they made a more gothic and palatable form of music, i.e., Cradle of Filth, Dimmu, etc., etc. But what I find now is interesting is that some of the biggest bands in the scene, and Behemoth's a good example. I mean, Behemoth are probably as big as Dimmu, you know, but they play a much. I mean, it's a very uncompromising form of music. It's very heavy. It's very dark. You know, I like Adam, but you know, even if you don't like him, you can't say that he's trying to make his music, you know, palatable for Slipknot fans, because it's heavy music. You know, you play a Slipknot song and there's some crooning and there's some groove in it, and then you play Behemoth. You know, we're talking about apples and oranges. It's such a different thing. So it's, you know, and Watain is another one. I mean, I like them. Some people don't.
Yeah.
But whether you like them or hate them, you can't say they're playing like a softened down form of black metal. It's very much black metal, very much extreme metal. So that's kind of interesting that some of the bigger bands now are the bands that are actually playing the heaviest music. And we talked about Cannibal Corpse earlier. You know, it's kind of interesting that they've broken through, and you know, there's people that listen to Cannibal Corpse and Amon Amarth and bands like that don't necessarily listen to any other heavy bands, but they are playing, you know, objectively heavy music. So
Yes.
I think there is a greater taste for extreme metal than there was, definitely than there was. I mean, even to talk about Slipknot, it's not a band I'm really into. Well, it's not a band I'm into at all, but they are pretty. Well, I haven't heard them for a while, but they've done some heavy stuff. Let's put it that way. We're not talking about like Metallica. It's heavy music. So heavy music has definitely become more popular as the years have gone on, and there is a trickle down effect. If a million people get into Slipknot, then maybe 100,000 get into Behemoth, maybe 10,000 get into Rotting Christ, and then 1,000 get into Grave Miasma. And do you know what I mean?
And then 50 people check out Necrovore.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't have I'm not, because I have friends. The reason I put these arguments to pass to you is, I guess, because I have friends and I hear arguments like this all the time, and this band sucks because they play with Slipknot. And I always find it funny because Vader played with Slipknot in 2004, and yet the guy loves Vader and won't say a bad thing about them. So
yeah,
I guess it's just. But so I like, and satanic imagery is a little bit more palatable. Of course, you have a band like Ghost. I never really got into. There's better occult rock for me, but the whole satanic image thing, I'm sort of surprised that is popular in America, because I've never seen. I mean, Marilyn Manson was the closest thing popularity-wise.
Yeah, I feel like Marilyn Manson was probably a bit more controversial in some ways than Ghost.
Well, because Manson was a little bit more. I hate to say the word edgy because it's lost all meaning, but it was a little bit more edgy. It was a little bit more like combative.
I think there was a sex and drugs element, which is always very touchy in America, and Ghost doesn't have that. Ghost is kind of.
And he was very combative. Also, he was very like, I'm gonna shove this image in your face and flaunt it and do drugs, and whereas Ghost just does the thing. I mean,
Ghost is kind of. It's not even necessarily obviously satanic in the same way as Behemoth or Watain. It's kind of in more of the same vein as Alice Cooper or King Diamond or something like that. It seems to me clear that even for I'm sure a fundamentalist American evangelic Christian would not like Ghost, but looking at it, it's more obviously a theatrical thing, I think. But it doesn't surprise me that black metal is popular now in America, because I kind of feel like, in a way, American black metal fans are more on the front line than anyone else in the West when it comes to sort of religious dogma, because you live in such a religious country. It's a country where a lot of your laws are decided by evangelical Christians, and that's something that it's sort of something that Europe left behind, apart from countries like Poland. So in a way, I can kind of see why there are people so hungry for black metal because
Oh yeah,
it's surrounded by religion, you know.
when I was a kid, and I live in California, which is a little bit less evangelical, but still pretty religious. And I just remember looking at all these lyrics and like, wow, there's somebody saying something other than, you know, I grew up in the Christian metalcore scene of like the early 2000s. I remember
It is
seeing,
a really strange thing.
well, that was the heaviest I can get away with. I was like 11 years old, so you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
you have to sort of grin and bear it.
Well, yeah.
But I just remember it was, you know, I don't know if it was a shock, but because punk has always had the anti-religious angle, but I think that was more just, you know, reject all religion, and whereas metal explored, didn't just say reject religion, but explored other beliefs, not just atheism, but you know, and they're atheists. I mean, Immolation explores atheism.
Yeah, and I think most black metal bands actually are probably atheist when you get down to it.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've only heard of like Dissection and Arcanum and bands like that that have a serious satanic philosophy or whatever.
There are definitely some. I mean, I think it's a lot of it is about not bowing down to kind of the dogma of society as much as it is about religion. So I think in more repressive societies like America, like China, you know, these are likely to build up a back. You know, China's got a big metal scene now, and I think, you know, if you live in a strict country, then, or not a strict, that's not quite the right word, but if you live in a country where there's a great sense of herd mentality and a great control over the media and these kind of things, it makes sense that this music's going to ignite some sort of rebellious fire inside people. And I think that's partly why black metal is so popular in
South America, even in the 80s.
Yeah, and America now, and Russia, and you know, countries where
Russia.
You know, freedom is a bit different.
I dated a woman from Kenya for a couple years, and I looked into Kenyan metal scene, mostly metalcore, but there were a couple bands that had a sizable following who were like black and death metal. And Kenya's not strict, but it is very, very religious. So I think when you have all those religious rules, you get a rebellion. I mean, whether or not that's, you know, because Russia has a huge NSBM scene or just a folk scene, or
but a huge metal scene in general as well.
Yeah, a huge metal scene in general with some amazing bands. Or Poland, of course, which has been ruled by the Catholic Church for how many centuries?
Yeah, I mean, Poland's probably the most religious country in Europe. Or let's say the more visible countries, it's probably the most religious. So you know, you can just see the way that, you know, Behemoth have been treated to see.
Oh yeah, I think in a large part of their success is because, I mean, I don't know if you read Nurgle's book. You probably, but he was talking about, you know, politicians use him as, you know, the boogeyman in a way, which is, you don't really see that. I think what was it? Was it Bob Dole? Was it Dole? I think it was, who name checked Cannibal Corpse, and that's like you'll never see a high profile, you know, politician taking on George Fisher.
Yeah, maybe, but I mean, I remember the PMRC stuff that happened in the States.
Oh, well, the PMR, yeah, but they were busy going after like Prince.
Well, Dee Snider most.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, Dee Snider, Merciful Fate, and the like, and Dead Kennedys.
And Dee was, yes, exactly, and you know, they were very eloquent.
That was one of the best. That was one of the best. I'm not a huge Twisted Sister fan, although I do like Dee Snider's latest album. It's vanilla heavy metal, but it's very well done. But his performance of the PMRC was one of the greatest moments ever.
Yeah, absolutely. And Marilyn Manson, you know, he got blamed for Columbine, and so I think metal musicians, you know, are easy targets probably. We don't really have that so much in Europe, Western Europe, I think. Although there was a massacre that happened in the UK, and they briefly tried to blame it on him being a Sepultura fan. That was in the early 90s, so it does still happen. I mean, you know, I can kind of understand it if someone doesn't know anything about extreme metal and they see, oh yeah, he was into these bands that sing about death, and you know, you can see how these presumptions, you know,
I heard one incident where a guy, I think he turned over some gravestones and stuff like that. Just late night fun if you're a dumbass teenager, which we all have been. Not that I've done anything like that, but he got caught and tabloids screamed to ban black. I think this is in the UK in the mid '90s.
Right.
Yeah, it was this guy. I think it was two or three guys, and they knocked over some gravestones and stuff, and people banned black metal. So you get a bit of that. You get a bit. I'm also a fan of motorsport racing, and you used to get a lot of whenever a bad accident would happen, you'd get people crying out to ban racing. So whatever I like, I seem to experience that sort of. And I mean, I don't care if politicians can ban whatever they want, but you're not going to stop black metal.
No, I think there is a degree to which. I mean, there are countries that do ban black metal. I mean, some of the Asian.
East Germany banned heavy metal, and actually, I have a friend from the former East Germany who's talking about sneaking in Wehrmacht, the thrash band, rehearsal demos and things like that. So he got some of the best stuff, but they banned it, and then when they unbanned it, Fear of God played a concert in East Germany for thousands and thousands. This is a little tiny grindcore band with a 21 song EP, and
Right.
they played them and Anal Cunt played a concert in '91 for thousands of people. Little grindcore band. So
Yeah.
people
But
hunger
even
for what they
more
can't have.
Sure, but even more recently, I mean, Watain were banned from playing in Singapore and Indonesia, I think.
Oh yes.
So some countries are still, in Poland as well. Not that they're necessarily banning black metal, but they've certainly gone toward.
Cracked down on it. They
Yeah.
had the Gorgoroth incident in 2004.
Yeah,
Singapore. You can't have chewing gum because that is a thing. You're not allowed to have chewing gum or listen to black metal.
yeah,
Sounds like a boring country.
yeah. I mean, it's and to some extent, yeah, I can see why people are still sort of fearing this stuff, because especially if it's coming from if you don't have any background in that, then it probably does seem to be. I mean, in a sense, black metal should be somewhat dangerous. I mean,
yes. I don't think it should be, completely accepted, and we should see, there's this whole push for heavy metal bands playing at the Super Bowl, the huge football game that I never watched. Right. And I was just like, well, okay, heavy metal band's fine, but let's stop at maybe Metallica.
Yeah.
I don't even want to see something like Slayer playing at the Super Bowl, because although I'd love to see the look on the drunken fans. What's this?
Yeah, I can't imagine it would go. I did watch the Super Bowl when I went to Texas once and watched it at a sports bar, and I can't imagine those people enjoying Slayer very much. The kind of, I don't think there's much of a crossover between that audience and the metal. But it's not like, I don't feel like metal has to be represented everywhere. I mean, it's obviously banning it is going too far, but it's not like, I don't know if black metal necessarily, there is an argument that, having metal as a more mainstream thing, it is a positive, kind of has a positive effect on the metal scene.
It has ups and downs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Germany is a country where you can see that metal is genuinely mainstream. I mean, metal culture is almost closer to sports culture than music culture, than arts culture. And Germany has a good scene, but then again, Germany hasn't, created as many good black metal bands or metal bands as Sweden or whatever.
Yeah,
so
Germany's more traditional heavy metal and things like that.
Yeah, but they're also more
thrash.
audience. They're more like consumers, perhaps, than creators. I mean, they do have good bands now, but certainly during the 90s, it was the place where bands sold the most records, but it didn't necessarily produce its own bands. There's not that many German death metal bands.
I'm trying to think of German black metal band. Moonblood, Nargoroth, and Absurd, of course.
Right. I mean, now,
whether you call them black metal or not, but
yeah, I mean, now there's more. Back then, you had, you probably mentioned most of them.
What death metal band? Oh, Obscenity. Obscenity.
Yeah.
So yeah, Germany hasn't really, but they've had a lot of thrash, and it's kind of funny
Well, you
because
had you had bands like Bethlehem, which
yeah,
was
yeah, Bethlehem. Thank you.
one of the most sort of important depressive black metal bands. And you had
Mhm.
Disaster,
Yes.
Falconback.
Protector.
Yeah, I mean now you've got Secret to the Moon, Ruins of Beverest.
Yep.
You mentioned Moonblood earlier. That's obviously an older band, but a good one.
But it's kind of because the UK didn't really have. Okay, it had thrash bands and quite good thrash bands, Onslaught and Sabbath and I don't know if you.
Not that many more. Yeah, those two are very important bands, but we didn't have. We did have some good underground thrash. We didn't have many thrash bands that made it to an international level.
Lawnmower Death, which I thought was hilarious.
What's that? Oh, Lawnmower Death. Yeah, I mean they're back. They're still playing. Yeah.
And Acid Rain.
We didn't have a great deal of.
But yet, you guys had a lot of very good death metal bands: Benediction, Paradise Lost, My Dying Bride.
Well, yeah, Carcass, Bolt Thrower, Napalm Death.
Yep. So it's sort of it's funny that Germany had a lot of thrash bands, but not very many death metal bands, whereas you guys were the opposite.
Yeah, but in the same way, I mean, the UK was very quiet in terms of, like, we've got a really good scene now, but between the sort of late 90s and the late 2000s, there wasn't a great deal of activity going here either.
Filth.
Yeah, the Cradle of Filth are kind of an isolated case. There wasn't like, Dissection came out of a scene that had 3 or 4 other bands that were as good as Dissection and played comparable music.
Yep.
Norwegian scene, enough said. The UK scene, you had Cradle of Filth and then just maybe 1 or 2 other bands at the same level for years. But now the black metal scene in the UK is a much more even, there's a much more homogenous and sort of unified thing. But that's only the last 10 years. It took a long time to get there, considering that we essentially created metal and black metal. We really dropped the ball for a lot of years.
The only band I could think of in the 90s, other than Cradle of Filth, was the Cradle of Filth copycat band. Was it Hecate Enthroned?
Yeah, I mean, the first 3 records by that band, I think, are really good releases. I mean, really good releases. I think the first.
Oh yeah, no, I like them. I'm just
Yeah.
They sound a bit at COF.
Yeah, we didn't have that much more. During the 90s, it was pretty quiet, really. Yeah.
Well, in Norway right now, there's a couple bands who are still carrying on. Most of the old bands are still around, but newer bands who still play. I guess Beastcraft aren't around anymore.
Vemod is a really good Norwegian band from right now. Hordem Rife is very good. One Tail, One Head have just finished, but that was a good band. I think Norway is still producing stuff. I mean, I think Scandinavia, Northern Europe is always a pretty good hotbed of that stuff. But it's easier to be in a band if you come from somewhere like Norway because you get a lot more support. There's a reason why so much good heavy metal and metal comes from Sweden and Norway, and it's that the countries that have supportive governments and supportive framework for bands. Bands get money to tour. Young musicians get access to facilities for free. So there is a reason. It's a shame that more countries don't invest in their youth and their artistic talent in the same way.
Well, even Sweden's hardcore scene was pretty thriving because even they got money. I mean, most of the time, I don't think the government understood what Mob 47 were doing or bands like that, but they were. And part of the reason why I'm asking these questions, of course, is because you wrote a book all about metal, black metal, and so you've observed a lot of the scenes. One of the scenes that's really taken off is France, because before the Black Legions, as I've said, and I know a couple punk bands. I'm not going to Comintern sect. I'm probably butchering that one. Sorry, guys. Sorry to any French listeners. Although, sorry to any listeners in general. Probably don't have any. Um, the Black Legion. I can't think of any other metal bands around that time in France. Although I don't know.
You had quite a few NS black metal bands.
Yeah, Crystal Knocked and
right, Funeral and
Armageddon, which has weird spelling of Armageddon.
There was a scene, definitely.
Two bands called Funeral, by the way, just for reviewers. One was a funeral doom band, the other was an obscure NS band.
Yeah, well, semi-obscure. I mean, they were sort of yeah. I mean, I guess you can say they're obscure. I mean, yeah. I think France is definitely. If you had to list 5 important black metal scenes, France would be one of them. But not so much in the early days. That was definitely more later with bands like Deathspell Amigo and Bluthaus Nord and that kind of thing.
I guess. Yeah. Then you had Deathspell and
yeah.
All the
I think like America, a lot of these countries, they kind of, if you look at the sort of formative years of black metal, you definitely have to say it was about Greece, Norway, Sweden. There were certain hotbeds, and it obviously expanded from there. And now, I would doubt that there's very many countries in the world that don't have some sort of black metal scene. And I think that says a lot about the universal. In a funny way, but although black metal is this kind of very extreme, underground, elitist, sometimes scene, there is something kind of universal about black metal. And I think there are people in every territory who probably probably only connect to black metal with that level of passion, because there's nothing else really that, that expresses those sort of feelings. Maybe certain types of cinema and stuff like that, but there is, there is something very. I would see it in a psychological way. I would say that black metal expresses something within the human psyche that most art forms would be uncomfortable tackling.
Even countries like Iceland, who the only band I know from Iceland from the '80s is the band I just posted earlier, Flames of Hell.
Right.
Great album, by the way. And then nowadays you have that new band that's kicking everyone's ass. I can't pronounce the name because I don't want to. Yes, that one.
Yeah, Sinmara as well. Auden.
Yep.
I mean, yeah, that's a very hyped scene, and I think some of the hype is just hype. But to be fair, it's got a lot of talent as well. And Salt to Fear, of course. I guess a lot of black metal related band, but obviously don't sound like black metal now.
No. I think a lot of countries that are obscure get high. Although I like the Romanian scene for which has produced a lot of great bands, but at least in my neck of the woods was really hyped up because no one ever heard of Romanian metal before.
Right.
Before early 2000s, so it was really hyped up. Not that it's not deserved, but I think that's sort of part of the reason why Norwegian black metal was such an interesting topic, because even when I was growing up, 2006. Oh, sorry about that. Even in 2006, I didn't know anything about Norway. So other countries I follow racing, so I know Belgium there's racing in Belgium and Britain, obviously. I didn't know anything about Norway, so I was like, what is Norway? Why is there so many bands from Norway?
And Norway is quite an exotic country. I mean, Norway is actually one of our neighbours, in UK, but still most people don't know about Norway because people go to France and Spain for a warm holiday. They don't tend to go to Norway. So I think Norway is definitely. I mean, Norway will always have a place in the story of black metal because it created some of the best bands. But there is an added element of exoticism that people just like to go to Norway and see these amazing mountains and amazing landscapes. And it is an amazing country. But having said that, I mean, America and Austria have amazing landscapes, but they're not necessarily associated with sort of black metal spirit.
No, Austria, I can only really think of Belfagor.
Yeah, but I mean as lands, like if you go to Austria, you see views that are just as amazing and stunning and dark as you would see in Norway. But
I can think of places in America,
absolutely.
that are as snow covered as, and I'm thinking, why hasn't anyone started a black metal band?
Yeah, I think sometimes the Norwegian thing gets a little bit oversold. It does have amazing countryside, and it's it is an amazing country, but I think sometimes people are a little bit over the top with kind of singing the praises of the country and seeing it as this, there's nowhere like it. And I mean, there is nowhere like anywhere, but you will find amazing countryside all around the world. So
I think some of it's a little overhyped. There's a group of people, and you might have been one of the one time, so don't kill me. Black Packers.
Well, no, but I probably would have been if I'd been born in a different era. I might have.
I would have been as well. I don't understand. Like, I've always wanted to go to Norway anyway, just because I like Europe, and I've always wanted to travel around. But like, here's the and obviously it's sort of interesting, but like just hanging out for hours at the place where Euronymous' shop was years ago, I wouldn't mind seeing it. Going to the site, but like, this is a holy shrine. I don't know.
It's I kind of get it. I mean, I started going to Norway in 2002, and I've been there probably 15 times, I guess, maybe, about 15 times. But part of that is because I do a lot of work there, and it is. I can understand. I like going to like ancient sites in Greece because I find ancient history interesting. So,
but that's ancient history. That's not 1993.
Yeah, I'm trying to be objective about this because I grew up around London and I really like UK punk, so it's been interesting for me to go to those sites and get some sort of feel for what it's about. But I think people might, things tend to become bigger in legend than they were at the time, and obviously, there's an appetite for that. That's why we have films like Lords of Chaos, and people are fascinated by this stuff, and I think it's not unfair. It is an interesting subject.
I just make an announcement for the 3 people watching the show. I promised you a Lords of Chaos review with Jim. We couldn't. There was just nothing really to review. It was just a teen coming of age thing. I don't know. There was just really nothing to say. That was just for the people listening, because I did promise that a long time ago and never delivered. We did watch it together, but I mean, okay. I guess what I mean is overdoing it. Like I said, treating it like a holy shrine rather than just some place. I mean, like, I love cars, and so I go to different museums and look at the old race cars, especially. But I'm not gonna like bow down to the Indy 500.
Yeah, you have to put things in perspective. I mean, definitely a big part of kind of writing these books is to kind of capture how the history was for the people that lived it.
Yes.
So it's not just a case of visiting, a dry museum or a site. The key is kind of to speak to the artists that were there and capture their voices. And bring that.
Things I got from the book is I got a sense of what it was like in Norway. The good and the bad, the music, and the Murs and Churchbird. That was another thing I was gonna talk about at the very beginning, was every black metal history. And okay, I get why every black metal history talks about the murder and church burnings. You can't ignore it. And to be fair, when I was a kid, it was really interesting. But Lords of Chaos, let's just be just be honest here. I finally read Lords of Chaos, and it didn't talk about the music. It talked about the murders, the church burnings, and a certain guy from Burzum's political police, which had nothing to do with metal in any way, because he was in prison by then. But if I hadn't read your book or hadn't looked into black metal before reading Lords of Chaos, I wouldn't know where to start.
No, I think that's an important reason why these books exist, because I think Lords of Chaos is an interesting book, but it's a true crime book. It has very little to do with music.
Yeah, if you like true crime, by all means read it. And I've read it as a true crime book and got much more out of it.
Yeah. And, a lot of the true crime that's discussed in it isn't related to black metal anyway. The Lords of Chaos themselves.
I have no idea why because it's in the spirit of black metal. It's like, Well,
Well, I
in
think
that case,
one of them had a Metallica T-shirt. I think that was the link to metal. I mean, the brief for Lords of Chaos was metal related, sort of crime related to metal and Satanism. And
and he burned a church, and I was like, well, in that case, Jeffrey Dahmer's related to death metal.
yeah, I mean, it's how far do you take? Yeah, it's a true crime book, and there's very little overlap between that book and the books that we released.
No, I must say, like I said, if you want a true crime book, go read that because you'll find it interesting. You'll find it interesting. I find it interesting. I still find it interesting. But if you want really good books on metal, buy Cult Never Dies books, and that's not just because you're here. I honestly. I don't just promote unless I actually like what it. We interviewed the guy from Intestinal Disgorge. I don't know if you know that band.
I've heard the name actually.
Yeah, he's done some black metal stuff, and he likes Bethlehem, and we were talking about this sort of the same things about how metal, because he lives in Texas, which I guess was sort of I can't think of any black metal band from Texas.
Absu.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Absu. Well, they started as death metal though. So. Texas. Yeah. But it's like I said about America, it's very fragmented, and whereas Norway, I guess, has its own different scenes. You had the Oslo scene. You had the scene a little bit with was it Gehen or Gehenna, whatever have you?
Yeah, in Stavanger. Well, I think that's something else that people forget is that even the Norwegian scene wasn't one big happy family. It was all it's 3 or 4 different scenes.
Yep.
People weren't connected in the same way they are now, and there's something that I was a little bit surprised making these books. You kind of get to assume that everyone knows each other, but in some cases you're talking to a legendary Norwegian band that never spoke or met to another legendary Norwegian band. So that's kind of interesting. And Norway was quite a divided. I mean, the second book we released, the first full-length book we released, Black Metal Cult Never Dies, Volume 1, it has a big interview with Campfire, and that was one of the things that Dolk talks quite a lot about, is how actually there were little scenes and pockets of activity with very little connection to each other. There was the Bergen scene, didn't have that much to do with the Oslo scene, and then he was based up with some of the, in an even more isolated situation, and bands kind of, they didn't necessarily get on. And he was saying that he did a talk recently with Ivar from Enslaved, and he was saying that back in the day they were sending each other death threats, and things were very different at that stage. And
I say goat help you. So goat help you if you were a Christian band in that scene.
Well, yeah, but then again,
like Crush Evil.
Yeah, I mean, should you be playing black metal if you are a Christian band? I suppose.
Well, yeah, I mean, I like Antister or whatever they're called, but it seems a little bit. I don't know, weird. It's okay. So I'm in Los Angeles, and people think the LA punk scene was completely united. There was Hollywood, but there were Hollywood punks, and there were beach punks, and there were punks in OC, and the Hollywood punks hated the beach punks because they were basically surf jocks,
right,
who weren't druggy art students. They were actually pissed off kids as opposed to it being an art project. Other punks hated the Orange County punks because they were more pop, Social Distortion. But nobody remembers that, and everyone thinks that LA punks were just one big happy family. There were gang wars. I mean, people died. Los Angeles was a pretty brutal place back then. Because I heard of punk gangs, but I just thought they were like, me and a couple friends hanging on the street drinking beers. Oh no, they're passing out guns.
Right.
And that's just one city. That's not a country. That's So I understand scene division and how you might be led to believe otherwise. And the more, of course, I think the Helvete shop sort of, I don't know, was united, but everyone seemed to go there at least once or twice.
Yeah, it was definitely a focal point for the scene. In the same way as I said with the Athens bands, that they had certain record stores and studios that were focal points. And perhaps that's the reason why the UK never had for many years didn't have that sort of strong scene, because we don't really have there's not really a focal point for metal people. Well, maybe there is a bit now, certain bars, but certainly there wasn't in that time, the late 90s to the late 2000s. So these kind of things, record stores and bars and that sort of infrastructure, if you like, it does kind of have an impact on,
Oh yeah, well, I mean, for me, back when I was a kid, I was the only one into the stuff that at least I thought I was the only one into the stuff. So, but there were no metal bars or whatever around here, at least not that I know of. Finally, I met some people, and it did have an impact. We had a little scene and bands who never win anything. I sang in a Guar cover band of all things.
Right.
Another thing I was going to talk about was the image. You mentioned the image and not knowing what the image was like. I still don't, because the whole blind thing, and I don't mean to harp on. I'm not one of the people like I'm blind, pay attention to me.
Right.
But I do think that being blind gives me a bit of a perspective that I don't think a lot of people hear about.
I'm sure, yeah.
Which is why I do talk about it. And you were talking about the image. I like the band Guar. Laugh if you want, whatever. I didn't know anything about their image when I first heard the music. I just heard pretty good. At the time it was Beyond Hell, so I heard pretty good thrash metal. Later on I heard the music, and I also like power metal. And again, feel free to laugh. And the image there of fairies playing guitars.
Yeah, but in a sense, the image in some of these cases goes beyond the visual, because it is partly to do with lyrics and
yeah,
like you said, the fantasy element of
yes,
power metal. Well, the fantasy element of anything, actually. It's not just to do with the painting on the cover; it's the lyrics and what the lyrics are about. And I mean, it's the same with black metal. I mean, you don't have to be able to see to know that the image, if that's the right word, is about Satanism, unholy sort of these kind of themes are there in the lyrics and in the feeling of the music. So I think it's
you could sort of see what they're trying to get.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to Gorgoroth,
presentation.
You know that these bands are trying to sound
a certain way.
Yeah,
but as far as like Blasphemy in the early '90s, you were describing how they looked. Bullets and fog machines or whatever the dry ice I think it was. I wouldn't be around to I wouldn't actually know all that. So when the guy was talking about how he didn't want to go on a stage because he didn't have his bullets with him, I would be sitting there going, who the hell cares? Go on, because that's not a huge thing for me.
Yeah.
But I understand why it may be a big thing for him. But like unless like pyro, unless I could hear it or feel it, I don't know what's there.
Yeah.
Or
change, I guess.
Or if someone throws a bullet at me.
Yeah, I mean it's I'm sure you get a more of a honest
because of that I can judge the music. I think because a lot of people look at Guar, just use that band because they're very image heavy. A lot of people look at Guar, okay, Kiss clones, boring. Nobody ever listens to the music. Everyone just goes to watch the show and whatever. I got into them because of the music. I didn't know anything about Fake. I never actually seen them live. I never got into the. I didn't know anything about the Fake. I like the mythos, as cartoony as they could be. I like that they had a mythos, but they weren't all that. They weren't serious enough to like hide who they were. It was just like everyone knew who they were, but they had a mythos and an image and things like that. So I think that can get me to appreciate. Or people who, some people don't take black metal seriously. At least the modern day element were, women with huge tits on crucifixes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very specific. That's a very specific face of black metal.
I don't have a problem with personally.
I don't think that necessarily represents. I mean, black metal is as broad as it.
Oh yeah.
As you want it to be, really. And there's bands that just have
minimalists.
Yeah, minimalist sort of aesthetics, and bands that only have images and lyrics about nature, and bands that have. I mean, again, this goes back to, I guess, why I don't get bored of writing about black metal is that it's so vast and varied that you can explore so many different themes through it.
Yeah, I don't get bored talking about it, and because I talk about. I don't do as much metal talking as I'd like to. I'm trying to start my own, metal, I guess, talk show because I can't really afford to play music because I broke. But I've always wanted to start my own metal talk show because there are a couple shows like Reaper Metal Productions Hellcast, which you should all subscribe to. Sorry, blatant plug. Um, but I enjoy talking about it, and I enjoy not just talking about the music, but the style. Because, like I said, there's so many. There are people who newsprint photograph, newsprint image, and then there's Gorgoroth with their 2004 Black Mass show, which is
Yeah.
really extravagant and gaudy and not in a bad way, but it's a different, you know, it's a different idea, I guess.
Yeah, it's a different presentation.
I lean
I
more
think
towards
this-
understated in my presentation, but that's
I think there's room for all. I think that's the beauty of it in a sense, is there's room for all these different kind of approaches within black metal, and yet it still remains intrinsically black metal. And I think
whereas death metal, people who like Morbid Angel got a lot of shit for doing the whole makeup and whatever they did, having dogs on stage and cutting themselves. Because death metal is more just about wearing, as Euronymous loves to say, jogging suits.
yeah,
I love that quote.
I think that, I mean, death metal, I guess if we include bands like Behemoth or Belphegor, then
Gotten a little bit more image conscious.
yeah, I think, but it is a narrower thing. I think, death metal is narrower culturally and musically, and I listen to a lot of death metal, but it's not, it doesn't represent the same spectrum of interpretation that black metal does.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that any metal or heavy music genre does. I think black metal, as pretentious as it sounds, that's why it's something special or something different or something that keeps getting attention and keeps evolving, is because it has that much more scope and has that much more potential in terms of evolving and drawing in other influences. You can have black metal influenced by folk, you can have black metal influenced by techno, you can have black metal influenced by death metal, by doom metal,
Or heavy metal like Countess.
metal. It can kind of, it expands and sort of.
One of the things
like
that I always thought was funny was black metal has this reputation of being narrow-minded and elitist, which I guess in some circles is true. But it's also it was sort of even founded on sort of a not. I mean, yeah, okay. Euronymous talked about how every band was a false, blah 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 blah, but he also said that any metal that was satanic was black metal.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a sound. That's why he never considered Immortal black metal. I love Immortal, but I did kind of concur in a way. I don't know. They don't certainly call themselves black metal. I haven't heard Immortal call themselves black metal in years. But that's the thing about black metal, is it was actually founded on a fairly open-minded basis, which was satanic music. So yeah, there's people who think that, unless you record in a garage and you do everything yourself and you have a 4-track recorder which you don't bother mixing because mixing's for posers, then it's black metal. I think those guys are sort of, not that I don't like that music, but I think those guys are sort of missing the point. I mean,
Yeah.
Dark
Black metal
Funeral is
isn't supposed to be this stylistically limited genre at all, and in
Exactly.
fact, that kind of the template, the latter day template of black metal being sounding like Dark Throne and Burzum, that's almost like a sort of, it's almost like a caricature that became so popular that it became, people began to believe that was a defining factor of what
Whereas
black metal
nowadays,
is.
one of the things I'm really into, and you mentioned a lot of the protos, they call it war metal. I've always hated the term war metal because to me that's just metal that's about war, bolt thrower.
Right.
So I call it bestial black metal. Archgoat is Archgoat and blasphemy.
Yeah.
That's sort of, a lot of the bands sound different. You can't tell from the untrained ear because it just sounds like a bunch of wall of noise. But Archgoat and Blasphemy sound different from each other. Or the new, I think it's Tate and Blood's coming out with the new album next next couple of weeks. It sounds different from, whereas it's still incredibly bestial. Profanatica, perfect example, coming out the new album, which I've heard. It is great. Coming out the new album tomorrow. It sounds different from, even though there's both Black Death, you can't confuse Profanatica with Behemoth.
No, or Ulva. Do you know what I mean? I mean, not that they're Black Death, but I mean, it's still, we're talking about a spectrum of music, and I think it's something that makes black metal and maybe underground metal as a whole interesting and keeps it vital. Is that there's always this balance between the very conservative traditional bands and the bands that want to break boundaries and create something new. And I think if you had just one, then the scene would kind of stagnate, or it would change too quickly. But the fact that you have sort of yin and yang, where you always have these traditional bands, and you always have new bands that sound old, or new bands that sound kind of like it could have come out of the 80s or 90s. But at the same time, you have bands that create records that sound like nothing we've heard before, and yet it intrinsically fits within the kind of the lore and the canon of extreme metal. So
I think that's why black metal hasn't really stagnated. I mean, death and thrash metal definitely have stagnant period. I mean, thrash metal in 87, 88, where all you had to do is to get famous is sound like a third-rate Master of Puppets.
Yeah.
Or in the late 90s of death metal, where all you had to do is sound like Napalm Death or Cannibal. Whereas now it's a little bit different. You're seeing a lot more experimentation in death metal, not just in the technical or the melodic, but whatever the hell Portal is. I love Portal.
Yeah.
It is some great music, but I don't think they would have lasted in the early 90s. You guys are too weird.
Yeah, and I think that's also proof that I do think black metal is a more avant-garde genre generally, but Portal and bands like that would be proof that death metal as well. You can have a band that you couldn't really have predicted, like, that a band would sound like Portal in the 90s. If you'd heard that, it wouldn't really have made sense, and maybe it didn't make total sense even when it did appear, but it's still intrinsically understood as being like, oh, okay, I can connect with this on some level. So unlike, for example, a lot of electronic music, or like a lot of hip hop, where it's a sort of a total reinvention that leaves behind the old fans.
Yeah.
What's important in metal is that there's always this kind of continuity and connection between the old and the new. So, for example, let's say Despel Amiga. When that came out, it blew a lot of people's minds. That's not the very first releases, but
when they went avant-garde.
Yeah. So that stuff, people were like, okay, this is something new, and it's exciting, and this is groundbreaking. But there's a connection I can have with it on a sort of, I don't have to leave behind my 90s black metal. There's a sort of spiritual connection between them, even though they're sort of vehicles.
And there's a bit of I always say Death Metal Omega is all black metal with a twist, because it still sounds, some of it still sounds, like what we think of as black metal.
Yeah, we can understand it within those sort of terms. It doesn't reinvent itself totally. Whereas if somebody was really into, let's say, Public Enemy or Run DMC, and then they hear I don't know, Lil Wayne or whatever, or some kind of mumble rap, they wouldn't even necessarily feel like the old time hip hop guys, at least the ones I know, they don't even really connect with the newer.
Because it's so different.
Yeah, because it's so different, and there's almost a conscious effort by new artists within those genres to leave behind the old. And I think that it says a lot for metal that you have a conscious effort to keep some level of connectivity, some level of relation and kind of continuity. And I think maybe deathcore was an example where that didn't happen so much, where bands came out and were trying to just take. I don't want to sort of slag off that genre, but there was sort of a level of co-option where they were taking something without necessarily. Not necessarily respecting where they've taken the ideas from, and
I was in that scene, and I could completely. They sort of. they took death metal and mixed it with the American melodic form of metalcore, which, as anyone who's listened to the show, I love deathcore. No, that's a lie. Actually, I've slacked them off many times, but yeah, they didn't seem to really understand, as you said, or some of now. I like brutal death metal and slam. That's a very divisive genre. My problem with slam is there's a band in the UK called Amputated.
Yeah, I know them.
Their first two albums were good because they were just pure slam. It was stupid. It was, it was ridiculous, over the top, idiocy, but fun. Their third album, they tried to sound like Cannibal Corpse, but from a modern style. Not understanding that. I mean, if you listen to Cannibal Corpse's old demos, they sound like a thrash band with death metal in them. I guess my problem with that third Amputated album, which turned out to be the last, is they didn't understand where Cannibal was coming from. Now that's not because they like old metal. I think just musically they couldn't write old. They tried to write Cannibal Corpse from a modern school of thought, which just didn't work because Cannibal still, if you listen to a Cannibal Corpse album, still you can hear the old thrash metal elements. You can hear, I don't know, a bit of Creator or some Possessed or something like that. Whereas these new bands that try to, and some of them do it rather well, but deathcore especially tries to create that without realizing where the music has come from, which I think is something you do need to realize.
Yeah, I think it definitely helps.
But you can also be a little bit too conservative. Okay, so you probably remember the retro thrash reunion. The retro thrash revival in about 2009, where, well, I guess a little bit earlier, with Municipal Waste, bands like that. They never really did it. I mean, they did some for me a little bit back then, but nowadays they don't really do anything for me because it seems like they're trying to copy 80s thrash bands without, I don't know, without the cool riff. Like Death Hammer does something for me because it's just evil. So I think you could also go too far the other way and be too concerned with where you've come from.
Well, I think I think it's that kind of old cliche about kind of knowing where you come from, sort of, I'm paraphrasing, but it's like you kind of have to know where you come from to know where you're going, and sometimes actually knowing the scene you've come from helps you be more original because you know what's been done before.
Yes.
So, if someone makes a black metal band after 6 months of being into black metal, it's often more obvious than someone who's been into it for 20 years because they're going to rip off obvious tropes and obvious musical elements without even realizing that they're obvious. So I don't think it's necessarily about kind of, you don't have to repeat what's been done before or pay too much homage to what's come before, but it's kind of more about connecting with the same feeling and then bringing something new to the table.
And you could do that just by playing. I mean, there's a band called Hell Ripper. I think they're even from the UK.
Yeah,
they released an EP earlier in the year that I quite love, and it really doesn't do anything new. But there's a vitality and energy that connects. I can listen to that and then listen to Sodom and say, I don't feel like it's ripping off Sodom. I think it's in the same vein, and they understand Sodom and they know how to. I don't want to say replicate the spirit, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it's not. But it's not just. I listened to Slayer for 3 months, and here I'm going to form a thrash metal band called Angel of Death.
Yeah, you want to replicate I think replicating the feeling without recycling the music is the key to a lot of this stuff. Really, if you can do that, you're probably onto a good thing.
Which is what the second wave in black metal did. They replicated the feeling of, say, Bathory.
Yeah, or Destruction, and added something new to it. And I think as long as bands keep adding something a little bit new, then it doesn't stagnate. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's not necessary unless you're really determined to be an experiment. I know some musicians, they're really determined just to break new ground, do stuff that hasn't been done before, and that's a fair enough impulse. If that's what excites you, then that's what you should do. But generally speaking, it's okay not to reinvent the wheel and not to completely start from scratch or change the blueprint, but you don't want to be kind of just recycling or making a pastiche
Exactly.
for,
Reinventing the wheel is dangerous because for every time that's worked out, it's missed the boat about 30. The Morbid Angel's Eye album is a perfect example of they try to do something different, which I guess I sort of applaud that. But this is just my opinion. It sucked. I mean, it was horrible.
Which album we
So,
talking about now?
the Eye album, whatever. The
Right.
Eye album by Morbid Angel.
I'm glad they did that. Like whether you like it or hate it. I mean, I'm
Well,
glad.
yeah, I have to sort of respect them for sticking there. I mean, because they could have just. There were 3 or 4 sort of generic, listenable death metal songs on the album. They could have done 12 of those and called it a day, but they went out and they did something different. So I have to sort of respect them for that, even though I have zero desire to listen to it ever again.
Yes, it's yeah. I think it's. I think bands shouldn't be held back by the. They shouldn't be held back by their fans, really. I think
No,
bands.
I don't think anyone should. I don't think any band should listen to me. Let's just. I mean, I've said this to a couple people. A couple bands I've interviewed. Don't listen to what I'm saying. Don't listen to what I think. Do whatever you want. Even if I hate it, I'd rather hate it because it was your honest thing than hate it because you did it because someone else wanted. So yeah, I'm conscious of that as a because I'm a music fan at first, and that's why I started this show because I'm a very enthusiastic and evangelical music fan, and that's
And it does seem like fans now are more.
entitled.
Yeah, exactly. That's the word. It seems like music fans are now more entitled in terms of feeling that they're somehow allowed to sort of dictate where a band goes. And I think that's a bit of a weird. And we've all done it. We've all said like, "Oh, this band should have done that." But you have to take a step back, and especially when you go online. I mean, YouTube comments is where you see the sort of the lowest common denominator in any whatever field it is. But the fact that on message boards and Facebook and YouTube that fans can kind of criticize a band for doing something almost as if it's like an affront to them that I supported this band and now they've made the band owes you nothing unless you literally paid for that studio recording. The band can do whatever they want and you don't have to buy their album and you don't
Exactly.
I mean.
And I'm guilty of that, although I've toned it down now that because I have a lot of friends as bandmates, so band musicians, so I've sort of toned that down a little, and I'm like, yeah, it doesn't work. I'm not gonna lie and say I like music that I don't, but I'm not gonna. You should have changed. You shouldn't have changed because I'm me. You're talking about.
It's their band. It's like when people say. There are occasions when a band might have been well advised to change their name because they did an album that was so different. But for somebody else to sort of think, oh, well, that doesn't fit within like what your band is about. Well, it's not really up to the fan to say what defines the band. It's kind of up to the artist.
And I've said that before, but I'm also like, well, but they didn't. So, hey, we were talking about bands who've made changes. I'm sure Rotting Christ got a lot of flack for their gothic metal, which I thought was pretty good.
And they took they got criticism and applause for every change they made, and I suppose that underlines the point. Really, is that.
Oh yeah, I'm sure in the grind scene. There were, grindcore people. Oh, these guys are singing about Satan. These guys suck now.
Well, I think the grind, I suppose that's another reason why the black metal scene is more attractive to me than, for example, the grind scene, because there do seem to be less limitations. And I think that's quite liberating for both the musician and the writer and the listener. And, anyone involved in the scene, if it's too narrow, then you don't have much growing room. Genres do have to grow and people have to grow, and I couldn't listen to I wouldn't listen to gore grind unless it's early Carcass and Repulsion. I'm not going to listen to a new gore grind album because I know it'll sound exactly the same as the last 500 gore grind albums.
Yeah, I mean, I as you said about Spirit, the only what I look for in a new gore grind album is I look for there's a band called Liquid Viscera, which he's the guy from Intestinal Disgorge. He recorded an album. Does it reinvent anything? No, but it still has. I think it has the spirit of Repulsion and Carcass. But I understand why people may not want to listen to it because it doesn't sound, it doesn't reinvent the wheel. In fact, he wasn't going to release it because he said it sounded too much like Hemorrhage. And I was like, it's fun. It's fun music, Yeah, we're talking about. So the only band I could think of that really reinvented themselves, like complete 180, that I really like is a band called Satan's Host.
Okay.
They started out as a power metal band, but like 80s power metal. One of the few dark bands that sing about Satan, their first album, Metal in Hell, featuring one of the guys, Harry from Jag Panzer, one of my favorite vocalists.
Yeah.
They broke up. Granted, this doesn't really count because they broke up and reformed, but they were formed as a black death metal band. So same lyrics and same concept, but they were more black death metal than, and now they're an interesting mix of black death and power metal, which works on so many levels.
Well, that's another thing. Again, it's not that bands have to limit themselves to a genre either. I think, that's
organic.
Yeah, if somebody wants to move from death to doom to black to grind over 4 albums, then that again, it's sort of up to the artist. I think, the fact that you have this much space to kind of maneuver is a positive thing, really.
And that's why I love metal in general. Forget, not just black metal, but metal in general, is because, you'll get shit for whatever you do, but people can't. I mean, punk rock, you really can't. I mean, hardcore, and then you go more pop because you either go more pop or more metal or more, I guess, electronic because you're tired of doing 3-chord 1-2 fuck you songs.
Yeah.
So you go more, like I said, you either go more pop, more sort of metal like DRI, or more, I guess, electronic or emo or whatever. Whereas metal, I don't really want to play black metal right now. I want to play some, I don't know, black thrash.
Well, that might be another argument also for this sort of the internet age, is that if you do change or you want to do something which is a bit more niche, it is easier to find your market. It is easier to find people who kind of feel and have similar sensibilities, and I think that's really a positive thing,
Whereas back in the there's a great band called Armored Angel from Australia who started as thrash and then went more death. I think that kind of hurt them because their thrash fans didn't like the more death metal approach, which I thought was quite good. But a lot of thrash fans don't like death metal for some. I thought it would be just an organic process, but or bands. I guess it didn't really hurt Dark Throne, who went from more death to black. I guess because the black metal thing was exploding, and they were already a weird form of death metal anyway. You were talking about death metal being less about. I call Dark Throne's death metal more about art than just about serial killers, because it's definitely not, dismember. It's very
and I think in those days there was a. And there still are, let's face it, there still are bands who approach death metal in a more artistic or experimental way. And I think, those bands probably find it easier now to find an audience. I think it is a more competitive market, but at the same time, it's easier to market what you do to the right people. And I have to say, part of Cult Never Die's success is that the internet allows, we release very niche books.
Yes.
The biggest selling books we do sell in 5 figures, but a lot of the books we do sell in 4 figures, and some of the zine stuff we've done is 3 figures. So these are niche things, but the beauty of the internet, for all its problems and all the negativity of it, is that you can kind of find, even if it's just a small number of people in each country who really are tuned into what you do and tuned into the particular underground area you're talking about, you can kind of target them and find them, and like-minded people can meet, sort of connect. Meet would be the wrong word, but definitely connect. And I think for the music scene, it's a really good thing because you don't have the sort of tyranny of radio play or TV play or high street magazines accepting you. You can almost do whatever you want, and then you build it and they'll come. You create your voice, you create your vision, and
Oh yeah, I found your book randomly, on the internet, and we had friends in common who I talked to on Facebook, and
Right.
it was just as you said, you can find and connect to different people, and
Yeah.
the three people I've only done three of these interviews, lazy, but from Texas, Canada, and now the UK, so it's kind of amazing that you can connect and I always wonder what would happen if I was alive back in the 80s and 90s, because I can't read a tape trading list for obvious
Right.
reasons, or look at the album cover and go, I guess I could still do the name. A band like Repulsion, I'm going to like the names, or I still do that. I can't remember what names I guess Rotting Christ. I have to check that band out. They're called Rotting Christ. They have to be good. So I always
Would have
wondered.
been harder, though. It would have been harder, but it would have been harder, I think, for everyone in a sense. Like as I said, there were times when I would discover a band from a good review, but it would take me a year to find somebody that actually sold or would copy an album. It was
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, as
But
much as it's easy to criticize the modern era, the internet, digital age, blah blah blah, I think it's allowed the underground and obscure art forms and all the rest of it to flourish in many ways.
But how often did you find bands? Let's say you were looking at the record store and you were looking at, say, the middle section. You were passing up, okay, that band doesn't sound very evil. Oh, there's a band called, I don't know, Ripping Corpse.
Yeah.
Whereas I hate to say it because I love them, but I passed up My Dying Bride several times.
Right.
That name.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It could go the other way, because I remember you would have bands like Molly Hatchet. They always had these really great. They basically always had these amazing painted covers that made you think this is going to be very heavy stuff.
And then you take it home and it's flirting with disaster.
Yeah, it's something totally different. It's you could get fooled, and in the old days you could waste money ordering something just because you heard a good name on a distro sheet or something.
Whereas, or if you didn't know who King Diamond was and you just saw it, well, I guess his covers were pretty cool. But if you just saw the name King Diamond, you'd be like, "What is a King Diamond?
Yeah.
What's that?"
Yeah. Well, to be fair, even Emperor, even the name, when you first heard Emperor, it didn't seem to fit within the metal sort of language or lexicon at all. But that again made them stand out. So yeah, it's different. If the internet had existed back then, I'm not sure you'd have had black metal as a movement in the same way anyway.
Whereas I remember the name Hellhammer. That name just begs to be part of my collection. Yeah, I don't think, because it existed. I don't think black metal would really. Albeit now, I think a lot more people are taking advantage of the internet. Although I'm sure there's some people who still record on tapes and circulate to 50 people. But even Countess, one of the the band from where are they from?
Portugal.
Holland, I think it was.
No, not Portugal. Where Countess from?
I think they're from the Netherlands. They have, Spotify playlists and stuff like that. It's like,
right.
And they're not really a known band.
Yeah, that's a band that's kind of passed me by. I have one of their albums, but I couldn't even tell you what it's called.
They're good. They're sort of a mix of black metal and heavy metal.
They're a bit like Sabbath. The stuff I heard reminded me of Japanese sort of Sabbath. That kind of venom.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I just think it's funny how Vaughn has their whole Bandcamp and rather mainstream looking production. Yeah.
Well, that's another story,
Oh yeah, I know about that. That was quite interesting. But so I think a lot of black metal people are now turning to there's a great radio station out there. They play a lot of NSBM, but they play a lot of just great black metal anyway, called Wolflare Radio, and it introduced me to a lot of different bands, and they took advantage of the internet. Albeit I don't think they had a desktop plan until like 2016, a little bit behind the times. So So I think a lot of bands are taking advantage of the internet. Maybe not so much Facebook, but certainly the Nuclear War Now forums.
Yeah, I mean it's a different era. I mean, who doesn't have some sort of internet presence these days? It would be self-handicapping to kind of not use the internet on principle.
Oh yeah, I know. Every time I forget to update my page, our viewers go down because I forget that I have to update the Facebook page because it's just not something I usually do. And so the Swine Brothers page. And so whenever I update it, we seem to get more viewers. It's yeah, gotta.
It's a necessary evil. You can't, unless you're Radiohead or Nine Inch Nails or
Or yeah, or
whatever. You do have to kind of promote yourself, and you do have to, you have to use the tools that are there, whether that's social media or record labels or magazines or all this infrastructure kind of exists for a reason. If you're
what do
creating stuff, you might as well get as many people to check it out as possible.
what do you think? Because you've sort of you've been on the publishing end of things with your publishing company, and obviously you've been in talking to people a long time. Metal is one of the few genres, not just black metal, but I'll say metal in general. Metal is one of the few genres that really likes albums, not just singles, but albums. Because you hear every day, albums are dead, rock is dead. People are just going to start releasing singles and just do that. Even one of the guys from the band Feared, who has a YouTube channel, who usually says some interesting things, said that basically his advice to new bands would be don't release albums, just release songs, because that's people. But black metal people seem to like albums. Well, I certainly like albums much more.
In metal, it's all about albums. I mean, magazines generally only review albums. They won't review EPs and so on. As much as people talk about the format being dead in metal, it's definitely not. And it really is still about albums. And yeah, that's a format. Again, it comes partly down to tradition, traditional in the sense that people like to listen to albums. But more broadly speaking, it's less disposable. People don't, there was this great kind of prediction a few years ago that all metal fans would just have playlists and would just listen to like cherry pick songs from the record and make their own playlists, and it's not really how it's gone.
Which I mean, I do from time to time, mostly on like a drive or whatever. But if I'm just sitting before we went on, I was listening to the Master's Hammer, the Ritual album, because why not? So I wasn't listening to selective tracks. I was just listening to the whole album. And before that, it was the new Profanatic album. So I mean, yeah, metal fans, maybe not the more mainstream metal fans, but certainly fans of black metal, they like to have an album. They like something that, even if it's just a random song with no concept, it flows. Like the Dissection's third album, which is a divisive album, which I love. It flows in itself.
Yeah, and it's again, it comes down to kind of dedication and interest and the artistry and all that stuff. It's people don't want to casually dip into metal generally. They want to sort of engage with it in a more dedicated way, and that's why people they have the patience to listen to an album, and I don't think that'll change. There's always been this fear that people will become more kind of impatient,
I guess.
Lower attention spans, shorter attention spans and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think metal fans are ever going to be the kind of people who just play a couple of tracks and then skip on. And of course, there will be a bit more of that because it's easier to do it, But
yeah, I don't understand. This may sound completely elitist, but I find it kind of hard to understand just sort of getting into metal as a casual fan. I don't know. I find that. I find it a little bit hard to understand because it's for me it was so immersive. Like I remember being 8 years old and listening to whatever it was, music with heavy guitars, and just like I want to be in that scene someday. And thankfully I've immersed myself in it. I don't know. I can't really. I can understand being sort of into like Korn, Slipknot as sort of dipping your toes, but I don't know. Dipping your toes into black metal seems a little bit weird.
I don't think black metal has many casual fans. I think I don't think metal in general has that many casual fans, but I think black metal in particular, there's very few people that are into this in a casual way. If you're into it, you're really into it, and that says a lot. That says a lot for the genre and for the
Oh
fans.
yeah,
So,
I'm not knocking it. Just it seems a little bit weird to me, but I guess there are casual fans of everything.
yeah, I think. Well, the internet makes things easy. It's easier to be casual, but I definitely think that the more underground art forms and the more outsider art forms, they're always going to kind of attract more dedicated people, because you kind of have to be more dedicated to even find out about them. Even in an internet age, you have to be, you can get into black metal casually, but if you're going to know more than just a few bands, you have to make more of an effort than you do.
Oh yeah, I think even still with the internet, I mean, to really get into, I said the band Necrovore a couple questions ago. Very obscure Florida death metal band. To find them, I think you have to be pretty. I don't think there are any casual Necrovore fans around, or casual fans of the band Incubus, not the shitty rock band from California. I mean the band from was it Georgia who released the God Died on His Knees demo. It's hard to find casual fans of that, but casual fans of, I knew some casual fans of Demo or Cradle of Filth or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think still to be really into metal, you have to be more serious about it, because a lot of these things, even still, you're not going to find at the record store. I mean, not that there's any record stores around anymore.
And it's not gonna enter your life unless you search it out. Everyone knows what a Miley Cyrus song sounds like because you hear it in the supermarket or you see it on TV or whatever.
Well, the Czech band Tor, or Tur, whatever, I don't know. Those umlauts, man.
Yeah.
They are not anywhere. It took me forever to show someone some of their albums. I really like them, but they're not anywhere. So you still have to be a fan to get into the more obscure.
And that's the joy of it. The joy is that you can keep digging forever. You can keep searching, and you're not going to run out. You're never going to run out, even if you dedicated, every hour of every waking day to searching for obscure metal bands. It's not going to you're not going to reach a point where there aren't any more. There's constantly stuff to explore, and beyond the music, there's constantly different worldviews and different politics and different kind of aesthetics and different philosophies and all the rest of it. It's a constant journey, and that's what makes it so suitable for the book format, really, because there isn't an end to it. There isn't a limit to that.
I search every day for new metal bands, and nothing makes me happier than finding something new or finding someone with interesting worldviews. I mean, some of them are crazy, yes, but they're all interesting. I mean, even like the conspiracy theorist bands. Yeah, you may think they're wackos, but they stick in your mind.
Exactly. That's also and at some level, that's what's important.
Yeah, so it's I don't. Another thing, I stopped looking for new metal back in the '90s. It's like, well, why?
I think when you stop looking for new music, then that's a sort of you're drawing a line under something. It doesn't matter if it's metal or whatever, but when you stop looking for new music and you just start listening they say the average person starts doing that in their 20s. They just start listening to what they listened to in their youth or when they were young. But if you're a music fan, I think that's what it's about. It's like you never stop looking for new music, and you never get tired of new bands and discovering old bands or recordings
or forgot. Oh, see, Jim doesn't always have time to listen to new music, mostly because he's off on whatever his current obsession is, because he's that kind of guy. But I have, I always send him whatever I find, and I find, I'll send him Midnight, or I'll send him bands. So I get him into a lot of, because I love discovering new bands, and like I said, I'm very evangelical about it. When I discovered Coven, I shared the first Coven album with every single one of my friends. When I discovered Satan's Host, I shared Satan's Host with. So I guess evangelicals become a tainted word, because the Christianity,
right.
People who push Christianity, but I don't think evangelism in itself is a bad thing, because without evangelism, we wouldn't have black metal.
And that's part of the passion of being a music fan, is sharing your finds and
Exactly.
you know.
I think what people don't understand about, especially Euronymous, because people don't. I certainly the Lords of Chaos movie didn't mention this. Was he was basically, and I'm saying this in the nicest way, a music dork.
Right.
He was a big music nerd. He was like me. He was, he would find obscure things from like Romania, and he would share them with his friends because he just thought they were the coolest thing ever. And that's something that your book and other books have really got me to understand. He wasn't always just sitting there burning churches. He was sharing the love.
Absolutely, and I think that's another kind of common ground for a lot of people, both both who read the books and the people that are interviewed in the books. The common thread is that everyone involved is a lover of music, and there's very different personalities in there, but you have to have that love of creativity and music, and that's a sort of fairly fundamental thing in.
And it's natural to, if you like something and you see someone like you were talking about, hey, look, that guy's in a Slayer shirt. Let's show him some of our music. Here's some, Cannibal Corpse. Here's some Deicide. Here's some, whatever. It was the same with me. I was in a Slayer shirt, and these people stopped and, you like Slayer? Here's some, Sepultura Beneath the Remains, or Morbid Visions, or.
Yeah, I don't know if that happens as much now. I don't know if maybe it does. I mean, certainly, as metal gets more popular, I feel like, maybe it does actually. Maybe it does happen. But I feel like the more underground metal is, or the more unpopular metal is, at a certain point, the more fans are drawn together. Whereas now
I can only speak for myself, because I had a sort of, I had up, metal education, not that similar to you or Jim. Whereas, I didn't really have the internet back then. So I think with the internet, a lot of it is more checking things out on your own, which I did plenty of that, but I also had plenty of, and there's just something, I'm a very enthusiastic person, which is, these interviews. I'm not very good, but I'm enthusiastic, about what I do and about sharing what I love, and that's why I started the show. So I always try to show my friends thing. There's a great metal show called Black Knight Meditations, and it's based out of New England. They play everything from Iron Maiden to Adorier and Archgoat, and
Right.
Ye Got Heard Gods, which there's a band called Ye Got Heard Gods out there, which released the best album of 2018, which everyone should check out. It's called Ashes Shall Be Made of Them. Blatant plug. So I feel like, like as you say, sharing the love. I think that's how scenes are created. As you say, reading in the book. Oh yeah, I didn't really know about this band until I heard, Euronymous showed it. What was it? Someone showed Varg metal. Was it Euronymous showed the guy from Immortal Black Metal, and that guy showed Varg, I think was the story. So I don't think that's something that'll ever truly die, even with the age of the internet. Because
music is a social. I mean, as much as it can, as much as extreme metal might occasionally have this kind of
I think the internet has sort of helped.
Yeah, it's a social. Music is communication. Essentially, all music is the communication of the musician or the artist to the listener. And I think there's always that communication between one listener and another. One person who's passionate, and I think that's what it's all about. You can't really remove that from the experience.
I do think the internet has helped in a way, in that there's not a lot of people where I sort of live, or because I live out in the sort of the mountains, and because of the internet, I mean, my co-host Jim and I, where I'm talking about, going to where he lives to, to stay for a while, but just to see more of America. I've only really seen Texas and New Orleans, so. But because of the internet, I get to meet people who are into metal who may not be even in the same country, even in the same same state or same country, and I get to be as evangelical as I want to be. Whereas, here the only one who listens to me are the dogs. I think the dogs like black metal, so that is something that I think the internet, with all its downs, and there's a lot of downs. I think the internet is mostly a good thing.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly, whether it's. I think it's like, to try and decide if the internet's a good thing is like trying to decide if the phone or the wheel or an axe is a good thing. But definitely one of its good, a lot of its good aspects are reflected in music and arts, culture, and so whether it's a good thing for humanity as a whole is probably a whole other question. But
well, the axe is a great thing for humanity. It helps me kill my enemies faster.
Well, that might not be so great for them.
Yeah, right. No, it's not a good thing but so and I've talked about this, and I've wanted to have sort of generate the conversation about, because we were talking about me and my friends were talking about a show called Stranger Things, which I never really got into. It's sort of an 80s, well, you've probably heard of it. It's an 80s throwback show.
Yeah.
And I was saying that I don't think I'd actually want to live sort of when the show happened, just because I like a lot of tapes from the 80s. Who's to say you would have even, because you were talking about, finding records from the 90s that you had no idea what they were back then. And yet with the internet, you could find records that, especially me, I can't read magazines or anything. Although a friend of mine used to read Terrorizer magazine to me, so that was pretty awesome. I got nostalgic when seeing some of the back issues that you had. I was like, yeah. I remember those.
Yeah, I think nostalgia's it's a bit of a dangerous thing.
Nostalgia is a double-edged sword. There's a husband and wife who live as if it was like the Victorian era. They live in, I think, Washington. And I was laughing because I was like, they wouldn't have had most of the information about the Victorian era because they were printing out magazines from Google Books.
Yeah.
I was like, the funny thing is you hate modern technology so much, and yet you wouldn't have most of this information if you didn't have modern tech.
Yeah, it's dangerous to get too stuck in the past, and I think it's, as much as the 90s were, especially in black metal terms, it was the most exciting decade because it was still quite it was this new thing. No one really knew where it was going, and there was a lot of chaos going on. You don't want to get into that whole things were better in the old days. There's a lot of stuff now which is it's a lot better. I'm much happier to be able to.
I'm a huge racing fan, and so I get a lot of that. Oh, the 80s were better with Mansell and Senna and Prost, or the 90s were better in American motorsport with kart racing and things like that. And I love history. I'm a huge fan of history, but at the same time, I don't, because I got wrapped in it a long time ago, and I got in it. Things sucked after 1993, which I wasn't even born in 1993. So what the hell am I talking about? And I realized that wasn't really a healthy mindset. You have the best of those parts. How about the worst of those parts? How about like not being able to watch racing from the 80s because you didn't have cable?
Exactly. That's the funny thing is you can enjoy much more stuff from the 80s
now.
But then, if you want to listen to 80s records, all night, you can go on YouTube and discover 80s records. It wasn't like that back then,
The Flames of Hell record. The Flames of Hell record that I talked about.
Yeah.
People had actually heard of that record before, 2010. Yeah. It's a great record, but I have a feeling that nobody had heard of it before then. So that's why I always temper my nostalgia with, I guess, realism.
Yeah, I'd love to be able to visit a lot of these eras. I'd love to have gone back.
Yeah, no, I'm too. Time machine, man. Time machine.
That'd be great.
Gotta build a time machine. But I'd love to visit, but
nice to visit, but you wouldn't want to live there. And I think, again, it's a bit of a cliche, but in a way, of these books, as I was saying about the Rotting Christ book, is it's the closest I think in some ways the closest you can get is to try and capture what a certain era was about through the voices of the people that were there. You know, I'll never know what it was like to be at Helvete, but I feel that evolution of the cult book gives you a good impression because you get interviews with so many people who were there. You know, I'll never know what it was like to be in Athens in 93, 94.
Well, and also dispelling some of the rumors about Helvete, because everyone thinks it was this black metal Bible. One of my favorite stories, I can't remember who told it. One of my favorite stories was they didn't have the Dark Throne, A Blaze in the Northern Sky album, so some of the people just went out and stole it from the big record store.
Yeah.
It's so big. So I think that's also, you know, getting rid of some of the rumors, and also, as he said, feeling what it's like to live. There's a great 3-volume set on the Third Reich, which really encapsulates what it's like to live in Germany in the 1930s, because it has diaries of the people and things like that, which you don't get from a lot of other history books. Because I like reading history books, and yeah, the Third Reich's played out, but no one really. It's actually kind of funny, because for how many books have been written on Nazi Germany, no one's really managed to encapsulate it until this 3-volume set. I haven't felt like I had an idea of what people lived in the 30s in Germany. Same thing with, you know, I finally have an idea of what it was like in that record shop,
right?
Or you know, in the or the Ross Bay cult, which does sound quite fun. The Ross Bay Cemetery. I know some people in Canada. They verified most of that stuff, by the way.
Yeah. Well, again, it's taken the reader to somewhere that a time and place that they wouldn't be able to, experience otherwise. I think in a way that's what any kind of book is about.
Exactly, and I think you do some great work, and I'll try to read that Rotting Christ book for sure, because I really do want to. It's not that whatever. Yeah, I'd love to, because I love Rotting Christ, and I love reading about historical metal, but very few people have managed to encapsulate what it was like when bands formed, or and then there's been some great books. There's a great book about death metal out there. Actually, there's two great books about death metal. One of the great books is from the guys themselves. It's called Extremity Retained, and actually does encapsulate what it was like, because it was from the people themselves. So you really got a sense of what the local scene was like, and what it was like. One of my favorite was, I think it was Krabathor. I don't know. Yeah. I'm not good with some of these names, but because I have my screen reader, so I just trust it. But what it was like to play death metal or thrash metal, or whatever, in the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, I guess, back in the late '80s, and how they had to change some of the lyrics. I think it was like they had to change it to like, "We have a bright future ahead of us," for the government censors.
Right.
Yeah. So it really does encapsulate, make me feel like I understand a little bit more. So I think that's a job for an author these days. Well, It's always been a job for an author, and broader historical cons. Greece is a country I don't know much about aside from the Greek gods.
Well, you'll find more with this book.
Yes, I hope so. And I know they like scooters.
Right, I'm getting hoarse, so I may have to draw our chat to a close.
All right. Well, it's been fun. If you ever want to subject yourself to this torture again, just let me know, because it's been a really interesting conversation. I think, despite the distorted audio in the first part, I have to explain quickly that I can't hear my microphone the way it sounds. So if there's any audio bugs or anything, I don't know that until after the fact. If you'd like to donate and give me a professional studio mic, then,
So how do you spell cult and that cult.com thing? Cult never dies.
Yes. It's just COLTNEVER. EIES Yeah, it's not KVLT or anything. It's called. And I'm so glad it's not KVLT because I hate that spelling.
Well, anyways, be sure to check out his shit there. Good interview.
Yes. So that has been a Swine Brothers special interview with Mr. Dayal Patterson. You can, as I said before, callneverdies.com, just CULT neverdies.com. If you'd like to have questions, comments, or if you'd like to be interviewed by two incompetent people, you can email me at cosmicgodsdie@gmail.com. You can find Jim in Area 51 or hell. You can, Facebook is still Swine Brothers and Twitter is still at SwineBros666. For Jim, for me, special thanks to our guest, Dayal Patterson, who was nothing but awesome, and I think it was one of our better shows. See you later, folks.
I'm gonna be daddy for a bit. That's getting slapped.
Okay. Yes.